Hello, and welcome to Mornings with Joel, commercial real estate podcast, where we focus on rising stars and established players in commercial real estate and talk to them about how they are building legacies in today's marketplace. All right, so good to have you here. Welcome as always, and it's not every time I do this, I'm interviewing a friend. So I'm going to not act like I know everything about you and ask some questions that I already know the answer to, but for everybody's benefit, we'll certainly do that. But it's always good to see you, my man. And, happy you called out the time to be with us today. I know how busy you are, and I respect that. So, it's all good. Before our audience here today, if you don't mind, just give us a little bit, if you can introduce yourself and your background briefly, because it's very extensive, what you're working on now, and then we'll dive into some details.
Nice to meet all of you. I'm Kirk Sykes. I'm co-managing partner of Accordia Partners. We're a real estate development company based in Boston, Massachusetts, working on large-scale public-private initiatives that are transformative in economic development. So that's my day job now. I've been in Boston since 1981. Came there to work for a Black-owned architectural firm after graduating from Cornell Architecture School. Started a architectural firm in mid-'80s. I guess I was about 25. Grew that for some time to about 40 people. Worked on projects like the Big Dig, $20 billion, submersion of the highway system in Boston as the chief architect on that. And then went on in the early 90s while I was running my architectural practice to start a development company focused on the same kinds of projects, not as big, but transformative. And we started off doing affordable housing development in the early 90s. And by the late 90s, we developed the 27th African-American owned hotel in America on a block of land that we leased from the city of Boston. And in addition to the Hampton Inn, the first urban Hampton in America, we also built a 200,000 square foot office building, a 1,200 car garage, and 50,000 of retail. So that was my migration from residential projects, but still transformative, larger scale projects. By the early 2004, I partnered with New Boston Fund to finance the development of the largest parcel of undeveloped land in Boston, which led us to decide to start Urban Strategy America Fund, which was one of the first socially responsible investing platforms in real estate in the early 2000s, the forerunner to ESG, you might call it. I ran USA Fund as founder and president and CEO from 2005 to 2012. During that time, I became chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, with position I held for 2 years, vice chair for 2 years, and board member for 2 years through the GFC. And all that culminates in where I told you I am now at the end of completion of USA Fund and return of equity and top quartile performance. I launched Accordia Partners, deciding to go back to the development side of the world. That's it.
All right. Sounds good. And for the sake of our audience, what is ESG?
Environmental social governance. So has been having a meteoric rise in the last few years. In 2014, ESG had aggregated about $15 trillion in AUM in various investment strategies. By 25, it's anticipated that number will be $50 trillion. So it is focusing on the E, the environmental, much of what you hear BlackRock focusing on, and many other platforms. The S, which historically has meant sort of how your company is socially responsible to its employees, but now means more in terms of how do you hire, what's your supply chain look like, what are your economic development practices as a company. And then the G, governance, basically integrating more diverse boards, having responsibility to proxy and to shareholders. And this is where the SEC and Department of Labor have gotten very involved in the advancement of ESG guidelines and avoiding greenwashing and other efforts that they'd like to discourage by investment platforms.
Okay, all right, very good, very good. Appreciate that. Kirk, also, you've now you every time I turn around, you're on another board. How has that kind of come about? And I know we talk about that in before in other meetings and whatnot, but just in brevity, how has that progressed to where you've been able to sit on so many boards, in addition to the Federal Reserve and the boards that you sit on currently?
I'm currently on 2 full-time boards and 1 sort of part-time board. And normally there's a 4-board limit in the governance of a lot of companies. Basically, three privates and a non-private is some of the guidance that you get. So I haven't hit my limit yet, and I'm always looking for companies that I can help in their progression. So you asked how. The how part, initially when I was chair of the Fed, I served with a gentleman named Rich Holbrook. Rich was the CEO of Eastern Bank at the time. Some years later, when we were both off the Fed board, he asked me to join the board of Eastern Bank Shares, which is the oldest mutual bank in America, where they give back. And everything I do has to have a stream of giving back, of doing well and doing good. So I liked Eastern Bank Shares' mission. I liked the way they contributed. And basically serving there, I crossed paths with a great former CEO of Apt Associates, Wendell Knox, who was on the board of Natixis, Loomis Sales Funds and ETFs, which is the mutual fund platform for Natixis IM and Natixis, the French parent bank. So he asked me would I be interested, and the board asked me to join Natixis about 3 or 4 years ago. Before that, a fellow board member at Reese, Jim Simmons, introduced me to Ares Management, and I was asked by Ares Management to sit on the board of Ares Commercial Real Estate, and ultimately left because Ares has become my partner in the GP and LP and the project we're doing at the moment called Dorchester Bay City. And then lastly, in 2020, I went on the board of Aimco. Aimco, apartment investment and management company, did reverse spin, spun off a development company. Aimco made room for Tesla in that move. So it was a fairly large entity. And now I'm involved in growing our company at Aimco, which is a national apartment developer, manager, operator.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. So you've got a extensive background. We don't even have the time to go into all your time over in Switzerland and skiing. And I was going to ask you when's the last time you jumped out of a helicopter with skis on, but
I prefer they land first and then I go down.
Okay. Yeah, I know. But it's interesting because I don't know if you remember, we were when we were running the conservation company, we were in a taxi in DC, and I had asked you if you had political aspirations, when you were the board chair at the Fed, and you said no, you didn't, and you lived up to that. So you kind of stayed away from the political scene. So but it's good to see all these other things that you've been doing, and obviously all of this kind of plays into politics a little bit because when you're doing public-private partnerships, you got to have those relationships anyway. So it kind of plays all together. Yeah. So let me ask you this, because I know there's a ton of questions that are coming down the pipe. The project that you're doing now, Dorchester Bay, what's that all about? You mentioned that it's a city. I know it's a very large project. It's over $1 billion. What does it really consist of, and what are you trying to accomplish there?
So Dorchester Bay City is a combination of several sites that we have under control and have assembled. One of them was the former exhibition center for Boston called the Expo Center. The other site is the Santander back office buildings. And then the last piece is the Boston Teachers Union. So in total, 36 acres on the water next to the 3rd largest park in Boston, adjacent to the JFK Red Line stop, known as the Brain Train, because it goes to Harvard and MIT and Kendall. And the site ultimately will be 6.5 million square feet of buildings, including about 70% life science, technology, and office, about 30% residential, 2,000 units or so, and then also 165,000 square feet of retail. It's also roughly 21 acres of parks and plazas and open space. Ultimately, it'll be 21 buildings and well over $1 billion, more like $6 billion of development. But we're excited about the opportunity to build this place and to create opportunities. And ultimately, three things we're trying to achieve other than building real estate. One, to facilitate economic development that closes the racial and generational wealth gap by partnering with UMass Boston and other STEM-based programs. And then also dealing with infrastructure fixes in that we've got to actually address rebuilding 2 major roads and a new train station. So quite honestly, what we've said is a Dorchester-based city, inclusion means facilitating a house to own or a house to rent in a way that you can, the opportunity to have a better paying job through access to life sciences and technology careers that have been historically exclusive to people of color, and the infrastructure that lets you get from your job to your house. So whether it's bike, walk, train, we're building out the infrastructure that facilitates access to those opportunities for people who we can serve. Ultimately, it's about 40,000 jobs, 25,000 construction jobs, 15,000 permanent jobs that we'll be training for. And that's the focus.
All right. So that's really a transformative project, to say the least. So congratulations on that. We certainly look forward to seeing it come together. Let's go ahead and open up the line now. I know there were some questions. So as you guys start thinking about those, you can either raise your digital hand or put those in the chat, and I'll be happy to get to those and go from there. One of the questions T. Redwine wanted to know about soil testing and organic waste, as well as developing on landfills, prior landfills. She was indicating that some of the projects now are a little riskier just because of the lack of inventory on buildable sites. So you may find better deals on sites that have some challenges. How do you work through those challenges? Or actually, Ms. Redwine, if you can come on and just elaborate on what you're really looking for here, I think that would be good if you have a quiet background.
Yes, just basically, how do you determine whether or not there will be expenses, like big time expenses associated with building when the people before you, they only know what was before them. So since I'm in Texas, so what with Houston and the situation they have with EPA related issues and being across the street, you may have a subdivision across the street from an industrial entity. That's why I was asking about the soil and what type of research and how to research on what the property was previously used for before you commit, and then find out, once they start digging, that there's some organic waste where they buried stuff under there.
Right. Well, I mean, you need a good LSP, like licensed soil professional, who in your due diligence period is going to hopefully discover from the historical data of the site and perhaps invasive testing as to what you're dealing with. In places like Boston, where almost everything is landfill. If you go back and look at the historical profile of Boston, it's a fraction of what the city is now. And so inevitably there are stratas of different types of soil and soil components that aren't organic that you need to deal with. I will say that, maybe a better example for me to answer your question is the hotel we built. We weren't allowed to test the soil. They sold it to us, or it was a ground lease from the city. So we had to take it as was. And once we took it, we found out that it has historically been a lead paint factory on the site. And so there was a fair amount of soil that we hadn't planned on having to remediate. So one innovative solution is I formed an environmental risk transfer company with a engineering entity and a insurance company. We found a way to get to regulatory closure with the soil in a very creative way by making it inert and basically not having to remove a great deal of it, and then insuring around that. In the end, it saved us about $8 million. I then sold the environmental risk transfer company back to the people I formed it with, and I had solved the problem that I had to deal with. So That's an example where sometimes you're not able to test, and then you have to find a very innovative solution to deal with a hole in your budget. That's how I dealt with it.
Wow, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, that's pretty creative, man. So hats off to you. That project still stands today, and I know you're still on a piece of it.
Yeah. Well, if you don't have money, you got to get very creative.
Which actually leads us right into our next question. That was a great precursor. Uriah, you had a question about creative capital. So let's address that right quick if you can come on. I know sometimes you're out on the street, but Uriah, are you there?
Yes, sir. So my question was more around if you can provide some considerations or some insights around developing creative capital stacks, especially for individuals who are new to industry and looking to get their first project off the ground. Wonder if you can share some insights on what you've done in your career and if you can share some wisdom with that.
Sure. Sort of a basic way to think about it is 100% of nothing is nothing. So I'm big on partnering to achieve the outcomes you want, which usually means you have to dilute some aspect of your involvement in the project, but you'll want to hold on to control of certain aspects. So it's important to go seek out partners that you can align yourself with who may not have some of the same capabilities you have. And that's really the role of a developer. Capital allocators may have money, but they don't have a way to deploy the capital without partnership with developers. So trying to get to your question about sort of innovative projects, other than finding, and a partner could be a doctor, a lawyer, or a big bank. So you could, depending on the scale of the project, you might try to align yourself with people who admire your skill set. Alternatively, there are crowdfunding approaches. The versions of crowdfunding I've done have not been a crowd, but I'd say a cluster. And that's in each of our projects, we have a sleeve of what I like to call colorful capital. And these are qualified investors of color who are looking to invest in large scale projects and will aggregate anywhere from 50,000 on up. And we've built a quiver of that and inserted that along with our institutional capital. The last one I'll leave you with is, I have not done this, but a friend of mine, Lanier Richardson, who's a member of Real Estate Executive Council as well, used a group called Small Change in a project he did in Baltimore. They did do a crowdfunding raise. I think it was on the order of several $100,000 on about a $6 million project. And that is a platform that actually does that aggregation around your project. So you might look up Small Change and ask them a little more detail on how they could help you raise some of that money you need.
All right. Or what you could do, since Lanier Richardson was our guest last week on the podcast, you could just watch last week's show. So,
there you go.
Yeah, because he talked about that as well. So fantastic. Appreciate you bringing that up, Kirk. You're right. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. Thank you for that insight.
Good. And Kirk, it's funny you mentioned that because I heard you were kind of joking when I saw you, week before last or whatever. I don't know what Joel's doing now, because you mentioned about this podcast that I got going. But what you described is exactly what we did. This Philadelphia project that you know about, we entered into a partnership with a group of developers that have done over 25,000 multifamily units and over 1.5 million square feet of office in the DC market. With that partnership and us being able to bring capital to the table, we've been able to walk in and provide value to people where they have those holes in their development projects in order to help them out. That wasn't the case in Philadelphia, but it gives us the entry to help out on other projects. So you're spot on with that, and that actually does work. So we appreciate that. All right, Kwame, good to have you back. What's on your mind, man? How you doing today?
I'm great. It's great to be back. So Mr. Sykes, I just want to thank you. It's an honor to be on the call with you. I actually went to Brown University and run its real estate board. So one of my members is your partner, Mr. Galvan.
Oh, good.
So he is phenomenal. I mean, a few years ago, he approached me. He said, I'd like to work with young men of color to get them where they want to go in the industry, which I was struck, given even the makeup of my board is predominantly white, to have a white developer come and say, I really want to partner and be an ally. So I was very impressed. I also have another person you work with, Fred Cooper at Toll Brothers, is on my board. So what I'd like to talk about is the importance of having allies, because what I've come to realize is that as a person of color, we can't do it on our own. If we could do it on our own, we would have already done it. But you seem to have an understanding of how to build those allies and choose these partners. Can you talk about that and how important it is in order to be successful in this industry?
Yeah, no, that's a great, thank you very much, Kwame. I think you do have two amazing allies in Fred and Dick. They are extremely enlightened, non-diverse people, but you need that, and we don't see enough in our industry. I would say that there are lots of ways to go about finding people who have that alignment. When I was chairman of Real Estate Executive Council, and now I'm on the emeritus board, we started doing that reach out. But now in the last few years, given the moment, we have aggregated a lot of diversity partners who are the majority firms who are interested in spending the time to figure out how to get it right. And they are many of the largest companies in real estate. So part of it is creating an environment where people who may not understand how to be a good ally feel comfortable engaging with you around what issues are important. And clearly you've created that at Brown, because both Fred and Dick felt comfortable having that dialogue. That's not always the case. And so through these diversity partners, we try to create an environment where we can aggregate even more people in the industry at the top of the food chain and give them insights into how to, in fact, transform what is a predominantly non-diverse industry. So there's no magic secret sauce, but I will say aggregating a number of companies, can obviously increase the impact that we can have, and putting them in a safe space where they can, in fact, admit what they don't know and engage people like you is really what we need to continue to do. So thank you for what you're doing.
All right, sounds good. Kwame, that's good?
No, it's inspiring. It's good to hear. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right, appreciate that, Kwame. All right, sounds good. We have another question here from Ultimis Dees. Can you describe your first development project and what was your thought process in getting it started?
Yeah, great. And it may go back to an earlier question about, how do you aggregate money as a first-time developer? Mm-hmm. So my first development opportunity was partnering with an older Black couple that owned a multi-family property in the South End of Boston, the Grandersons. They were wonderful. They had a funeral home in Roxbury, and they had this property that they wanted to develop. They were being approached by a lot of non-diverse partners to buy their asset. We talked about how not selling their asset, but partnering to make it into condominiums was a way, eight condominiums, a way for them to even further enhance their value in that property. And I basically brought my sweat equity to the table, given my architectural and construction experience, and then cut my teeth on running spreadsheets and understanding how to work with banks with them, bringing some skills that they didn't have. And then that project, it got done. And then, 8 turned into 40 units turned into $250,000 at the hotel. And then $250,000 turned into $6 billion. So I'm big on big jumps. I like to make big jumps.
Yeah, we see. Oh man. All right. So good stuff. So Altamise, hopefully that answered your question. We appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. All right. I don't see any other hands there, but I wanted to, Terry, give us 1 minute. I wanted to just focus in on something that you brought up, Kirk, which I think is very important, is on all deals, when you're really getting started and you don't have all that equity to put in the deal, look at what you can bring to the table, and a lot of times with owner operators, they're kind of stuck. They might want to retire and move to Florida. And if you can provide some value for their project, perhaps take it to the next level, perhaps develop on land that's adjacent to it, like you have with churches and things of that sort, you could get in, let that land be your equity in the deal, and kind of go from there. So that's one way we see a lot of folks getting started. And Kirk, it looks like you walked down that path as well once you kind of got rolling. So, good stuff there. Yeah. Kerry, let's get your question. What's on your mind today? And thanks for being here.
Yes, sir. Thank you for allowing me to be here. Good afternoon. Good morning. I had a quick question in regards to, are there any technology solutions you might be using, whether on the capital raising side, like a pre-quin, or maybe even on the management of construction?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think we need disruption in the environment, the real estate environment, in order to make space. By that, what I mean is, this is a pretty mature industry with a lot of folks who have been in a legacy position, and it's very hard to break in. But technology is one of those mechanisms, and whether it's crowdfunding, prop tech, or other forms of innovative ways to identify disruption, and that really, there's no better word for it. Knowledge is valuable. It allows you to see something that someone else cannot. And I think we talked about one when I described the block that we own in Boston, where we moved a helipad, a baseball diamond, and a digital equipment corporation and built that hotel and parking in the office building. We had gotten a situation where, had we not had the ability to x-ray the soil, we wouldn't have been able to understand what we needed to do on an environmental front to mitigate our risk and our costs. So even environmental technology can be of value. So I think you're on the right path. Use technology as a tool that helps you see what others don't see. Use it to remedy the things you can't afford to fix unless you come up with an innovative solution, whether it's money, bad dirt, or construction execution issues. In terms of details, people are doing maker space fiberboard cut homes, now, and people are erecting skyscrapers in China in 30 days. We all have seen these videos. How many of those can fit in a regulatory environment like we have in this country is really another place you'll want to explore, because it's great to have a go-go ability with great tech. But the bad news is, if that meets unforgiving laws and restrictions, you may be challenged. So keep up looking for the great next thing.
Okay, all right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Kerry. Appreciate that. Marlon, we have, how does one become a more reasonable player in the commercial brokerage development space? I would like to pursue deals in the Southeast. How would you answer that one?
So your question is, how do you become more relevant in the brokerage space and commercial as opposed to residential? It's an interesting.
No, not.
Okay,
I'm sorry. More of a local. I'm in Atlanta, and in Atlanta, Georgia. So I want to get outside Atlanta. So more. I am in commercial, but I want to expand. Here in Atlanta, it's kind of, I won't say saturated, but it's hard not. So how can you expand to be better in Southeast area?
Yeah, I think one of the spaces, you're in one of the most challenged spaces in terms of being inclusive. Brokerage is really slow moving on this front. And so one opportunity I would identify for you is for municipalities where there is a regulatory preference for inclusive teams. Approach the majority firms in those markets. Bring your skill set from Atlanta, having done CRE brokerage in a mature market, and take it to Baltimore, to Houston, wherever it is that there is a regulatory requirement for inclusion. We have it in Boston in something called the Massport model, where their teams get a ranking of 25% of the preference for diversity, equity, inclusion. So now, whether it's Related, Tishman, or anybody else big, they're looking to make teams that look more inclusive. And you're in one of those spaces where, if you partnered with CBRE, JLL, Cushman, or anybody else, you might make them more competitive. And that would be how you leverage your knowledge and the opportunity in those markets.
Thank you so much. Is it a way to find out, just internet search, find out what states or what areas it has that inclusive?
I would do a LexisNexis search, or just search, because most of the times where it exists, it's being written about. I can tell you for sure, you might even just reach out to the Massport DE&I person and ask them where else because they went national in looking for who was doing what. So you might just leverage their experience. They might just give it to you. So call Massport, call their diversity, equity, inclusion person, and ask them where else they're aware of this happening other than in Boston.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that. Let's see if we can squeeze in a couple of other calls right quick. Glenn, you had a question. You have the floor.
Yes. Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Sykes.
You're welcome.
I'm trying to ratify something within my brain. So I think this is a very unique opportunity to have someone with as much experience and wisdom. So I want to just toss this out here. A lot of opportunities of capital are hitting the market in terms of emerging minority developers. I would go so far to say is the majority of them, or maybe all of them, are in the affordable housing space. I'm not against affordable housing. I work for an affordable housing developer. I know that it does good. But there's also this conversation about closing the wealth gap. I've never seen affordable housing development and generating wealth in the same vein. If you were beginning today, how would you approach these opportunities as a new developer? Would you jump into the affordable housing development, not just because it's a way to do well, but do you see it as a path to generate wealth as a real estate developer? It just bugs me that every opportunity is for African Americans, minorities, to have to go back and fix the problems that we didn't create with money, but they always are pigeonholed for affordable housing. No one is creating emerging developer deals for market rate. I'm just wondering, what are your thoughts around that?
Sure. No, it's actually a great question. Thank you. The reason affordable housing development has been a somewhat desirable path is because it's fairly low equity intensive. It doesn't require, you're basically leveraging tax credits. That's exactly why it's somewhat limiting, because there are only so many tax credits allocated per state that then get allocated across the whole state. So it's actually a very difficult space to be your sole business and scale. And it is also, it's like limited equity. It requires less money, so it gives you less return. Some of the things we talked about earlier in this podcast about aggregating capital, about partnering to find sources of equity, are the path to getting into more commercial opportunities, because they are more capital intensive. But if you can bring a number of people's capital together, you can find your way to a space other than the affordable housing genre. So it's spot on. You're absolutely right. And quite frankly, affordable housing, while extremely necessary, it is not the path that most America took to wealth creation. The majority of wealth creation happened through the GI Bill and through people owning homes and the homes appreciating. That has historically not been available to Black people and people of color. So we've aligned ourselves with a group called MAHA, Mass Affordable Housing Alliance. They are doing down payment assistance matches, which will allow hundreds of people of color to own homes and be part of that wealth creation. So I kind of answered both sides of your question. One, about where you might focus and how you might focus there as a developer, and also how you might help focus opportunities for more people to be homeowners by producing a more affordable housing product, and in the process might help yourself scale as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. And Glenn, actually, I want to mirror that, because even on my projects, we look for pre-development opportunities and things of that sort. And all that capital, or so much of it, I should say, is all earmarked for affordable housing. So, it does become a challenge. And, maybe Kirk will have you back another day to kind of talk about that in more detail down the road somewhere. But that is an issue. And Glenn, I think you're spot on. Everybody wants us to do affordable housing as opposed to doing market rate developments. That could be a little frustrating in regard as well. So thank you for bringing that up. We'll get one more call if we can. Ken, you had a question. Want to go ahead and bring you in. I don't know if you're a first-time podcast listener here, but we wanted to get your question if you still have one.
Hi, good evening, good morning. My question is kind of a piggyback on the Southeast. And as you know, where I live, in Louisiana, with regards to the funding thing, would you suggest just like local banks or independent investors, or going with the firms and trying to identify, to create, a capital stack when it comes to doing, a development project, whether it's a market rate or affordable housing?
Right. Well, I think we covered affordable housing. It's, as we discussed, it's tax credit, equity, there's an allocation, there's a process, there are very prescriptive dates by which you need to submit. That's pretty well written. I think on the private capital side, the banks have really been out of the development business for quite some time. And, I was very fortunate 20 years ago to get some of my first big capital from Boston Development Corporation. Most banks don't have development corps within major banks anymore. So that leads you to kind of aggregating capital from whatever your sources are, your frat, your classmates, the contractor that may want to be part of the deal but doesn't know how to get into the construction side. The development side, and maybe he can participate with you. And sometimes you don't want to do that because you may or may not have alignment on everything. But the answer is, I think you've got to get creative and probably not swing for the fences initially. You probably want to start with some projects where you think you can put the capital stack together with whatever network you think you have access to, and then build a track record. It's nothing like having deals done to get to your next deal. And when you start to approach larger capital sources, they're going to want to know what that track record looks like. And you may have to partner with people to get that track record if you don't have it. But those are the steps I would take. Start with who do deals you can get done, build a track record, and keep stepping up the scale of the capital that you may approach based on the success of your prior projects.
All right, sounds good. Tim, thank you for that. That kind of tells the story of, from what was it, 6 units to 6 billion?
Yeah.
I'll write a book named that.
It was 8 units.
8 units. Get it right? 8 units to 6 billion. So fantastic story. Well, Kirk, it's always good to see you, my man. And, we've known each other for quite some time, and you've always been a good friend, and I appreciate that. Is there anything you want to share as we kind of depart today to our guests as they launch their careers or either advance the careers that they already have in commercial real estate?
Yeah, I guess I would encourage you to look into real estate executive counsel. There is a threshold. The word executive suggests that it's people with more than 10 years experience. So that may not be the space that everybody can access right now, but as you can, it's a great network of Black and brown developers nationally that are very much focused on the topics of this podcast. If that's beyond your reach in terms of your years of experience, participating in things like in Boston, we have the Builders of Color Coalition. We also have AREP, the African American Real Estate Professionals. So find a network of folks who can help you answer the questions that you may have in between Joel's podcasts, where he answers them all for you, and find a way to participate. And if you can't find them, like the ones I just described, get involved in NAOP. I'm on the board management committee for NAOP New England Urban Land Institute. I'm on the advisory board for Urban Land Institute for the Boston market. They all exist in your markets and could be great sources of a network to help you solve your project. Thank you.
All right. Well, on that note, we certainly want to thank you, Kirk. That was fantastic. A lot of good insights, and I know it'll be good. So when we didn't meet the last time, I wanted to make sure we had you rebooked. So I knew it would be fantastic. And for all y'all listening, we want to thank you so much for being here with the Mornings with Joel CRE podcast. We'll have this broadcast as soon as possible. And Kirk, as always, thank you. Say hello to Tammy and feed the dogs, and let you back to what you're doing for the day. So
all right.
Yeah.
Thank you all. I hope you have a great day, and good luck with your careers.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care. We'll see you next week. You've been listening to Mornings with Joel, Commercial Real Estate Podcast, where we focus on rising stars and established players in commercial real estate and talk to them about how they are building legacies in today's marketplace.
Please check back weekly to hear our upcoming guests.